Hey guys, this is ScaboCat18, and this is the Season 3 review of Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Wish you were Ed. Rolf becomes confused and homesick in the cul-de-sac, and Eddy decides to fulfill his needs by constructing a replica of the old country, making it with Double D, and making it as realistic as possible, until Johnny appears and unravels the whole scam. The whole story is really solid and contains numerous humorous highlights, like That's My Horse, Ed being the village idiot, and the misunderstanding Eddy has of Rolf's entire culture. Mama's Little Ed. Eddy finds somewhat of a golden goose when he discovers that Double D does almost everything his parents tell him to do through their sticky notes. So, he and Ed construct many outlandish escapades of his parents' requests. Rolf finds out and hits him with the Hat of Discipline. Clearly, Double D lives in a cave. The notes seem to be testing Double D's mental state and requests to bunk with Eddy. Unbeknownst to him, Sockhead actually knew it was Eddy for a while. Once upon an Ed. The trio find themselves stuck inside Johnny's wall, and he asks for a bedtime story, leading to the Ed boys to explain how they got there in an homage to Rashomon. Eddy has a successful jawbreaker bank, and thinks of each of the neighborhood kids as caricatures. Double D's world has precise measurements on almost everything, whereas Ed's story is just what you think Ed would interpret the real world as, with the Kenker sisters becoming mutated after eating overradiated mashed potatoes, Ed being able to fly, and soap being used as a weakness.
For your Ed only, Double D's bubblegum allows Ed to become airborne, and they accidentally destroy Sarah's bedroom, leaving Eddy to make off with Sarah's diary, while the entire cul-de-sac is searching. A hair forgettable, it still has its moments, such as Johnny winding up in China and Sarah's flip book of Eddy.
It came from Outer Ed. Ed decides to make up his very own scam for the first time in the series. Basically the only time. He first makes Double D and Eddy dress up in strange outfits. Then he requests a sacrifice of Jimmy's new stuffed animal, Mr. Yum Yum, who in turn makes Rolf nostalgic about his giant clam, Bobo. The trio's ritual obviously frightens Jimmy and Rolf, leading to them to run away inside the clam. And despite all odds, it turns out that Evil Tim's curse was true, given that crows spread about the entire construction site.
3 squares and an Ed. Double D shows off his mattress chutes to his basement, leading to the discovery of a cabinet of failed inventions, which Eddy probably messes with until they wind up at Eddy's house that Sarah and Jimmy are watching over, telling them that he is grounded.
Dueling Eds. Rolf has a party to celebrate his great-grandfather when Eddy accidentally disgraces him by tossing away a sea cucumber ball. Eddy at first is set in his ways, or jingoistic, that he did nothing wrong, but is allowed redemption via a duel. The duel itself is rather epic, funny, and as Double D put it, and in the end, the trio are given eels of forgiveness stuck down their pants that leads to an allergic reaction, making Ed resemble a fish.
Dim-lit Ed. Double D becomes concerned at the lack of knowledge, common sense in the cul-de-sac, and decides to allow the denizens to go through a scavenger hunt, with them initially believing that the prize is a jawbreaker. While there isn't much to say about this episode, it does include Pink Belly, also the frame.
Will work for Ed. Rolf requires a working hand on his farm, and decides to hire Ed. But unfortunately, it seems his attempts to help are not as desirable as previously imagined, resulting in numerous pay deductions to the ire of Eddy, who then starts striking for proper pay. After the negotiations, the other two Ed boys are put to work with Ed being their supervisor.
Ed, and away! The Eds get distracted by a stray balloon and try to catch it and pop it as best they can. They go through numerous colorful locales, but eventually it is shown to the audience that Kevin was the one who unleashed the balloon as a form of payback.
X marks the end. Eddy becomes worried about his zit when he finds his very first zit. At first, everybody makes fun of him for it until Double D snaps and puts them in their place. Rolf then volunteers to help remove the blemish using an old world carbuncle of the flesh stew. Thankfully, the remedy does work, to an extent. Probably one of the funniest endings so far. And it's like a certain reviewer once said.
From here to Ed, Kevin and Rolf are playing in the cul-de-sac when Kevin inadvertently causes a scam to fall apart. Eddy then attempts numerous times to get revenge on what was obviously merely an accident. While the episode is not entirely memorable, if you enjoy the ride, it's a fun one, especially given the numerous attempts such as Ed's old lunch bag and using a giant head of Johnny.
Boys will be Eds. Victor chases after Jimmy after the Eds cook up a sandwich stand. When everybody makes fun of Jimmy, Naz scolds them. For an unknown reason, all the boys in the cul-de-sac, aside from Rolf and Jimmy, seem to be infatuated with her. They all attempt to earn her favor until Eddy tries to woo them with a romantic ballad at Jimmy's house.
Eds or Tails. Ed mail orders a 2-pack of Jawbreakers, and Double D and Eddy must figure out ways to split it in 3 equal ways. After the first one is destroyed with disastrous consequences, they decide to hold competitions to determine the recipient of said last Jawbreaker. They then accidentally fling it into the creek. As it turns out, well, watch the episode. It's a lot of laughs.
Gimme, gimme, never Ed! Johnny reveals that Plank is an impulsive thrill seeker, so Eddy makes all sorts of crazy rides, starting with bumper cars that fail to excite, then enters the log of no return that has Plank flung towards a log filled with termites whilst supplying a parachute. Finally, we have Requiem for a Whiplash, a massive roller coaster that Plank tricks the Eds into riding, leading to its destruction and Johnny and Plank's refund.
My Fair Ed. Eddy and Ed inadvertently cause major destruction to the cul-de-sac. Double D then has to teach them manners and social skills through means of Pavlovian training until they are proper, until their ways of supposed properness are in reality hurting more than they help.
Ed has a dream that all seems normal until...
Mom, Sarah's fibbing! Honest and poor truly! I was in my happy place, lost in the void of my mind!
Edward, how many times have I told you to be nice to your baby sister?
So after waking up, the trio head on over to the playground where Naz is running a gymnastics competition. Ed inevitably runs into Johnny and freaks out in a way that only Ed can. Double D suggests sitting down with Johnny that causes Ed to burst out and hug him, waking up Johnny from a nightmare. and 11. The trio inadvertently find a treasure map in Eddy's brother's room that unfortunately ends up leading them to the Cankers. It's up to the Eds to figure out a way to get their treasure without alerting them. A lot of these reviews may seem a bit short, but to compensate, here's a nice reference that you may have not gotten a few years back. The Luck o' the Ed. Eddy is forced to clean out his bedroom by his mother and asks Ed to hide his magazines, which Ed forgets the location of almost immediately. Hey, it's called Whiplash. Double D attempts to numerous ways to retrace his steps, unfortunately resulting in no avail, leading to the increased paranoia on Eddy's part. Ed, pass it on. A restaurant scam fails, and Eddy's brother evidently attempted in the past to great success. Eddy then decides to start a massive rumor of his brother's return. The trio attempt to use this for personal gain until it's revealed that each of the neighborhood kids have a different idea of Big Bro. Naz thinks him a mountain climber. Kevin and Rolf are consumed by fear and attempt to hide. And Jimmy and Sarah do not fall for the rumor. All seems well until Big Bro actually shows up. In actuality, Sarah and Jimmy. Brother, can you spare an Ed? Ed is given money to buy Sarah and Jimmy fudge from the candy store, until he is persuaded by Eddy to buy Jawbreakers instead, which he unfortunately does. Sarah rather obviously finds out, and Sockhead insists on paying her back with interest. Eddy at first lets the kids pay to wedgie the other Eds, then asks Johnny to pay for supposed piñatas. Finally, Double D gets the best of Eddy and offers wedgies for him at only a penny a pop. A very satisfying ending. The day the Ed stood still. Ed decides he wants to be a monster and has Double D make him a costume that, after putting on, causes him to go on a rampage. He captures Jimmy at first, then Johnny. This causes a stir throughout the cul-de-sac, with each kid fearing that they are next. The best part is that all these scenes go on, barely revealing what Ed's full costume looks like, in a clever parody of horror films. If you want an atmospheric creature feature, this does more for less in just 11 minutes. Oh boy. And next, If It Smells Like an Ed. Friendship Day commences in the cul-de-sac, and the Eds are framed for trying to ruin the celebration with baseless allegations. Their only clues for who really did it are a shoe print on the sidewalk and a hockey stick. No one seems to fit the criteria, aside from Jimmy, who insists that his father forces him to practice hockey. All is lost until Jimmy is found tied up and gagged with Rolf's favorite candies, jujubes, glued to him. Before they can explain, the kids believe that the trio are responsible and chase after them. Eddy finds a shed and hides until they discover the Cankers are hiding in there as well. There is now an impasse. Stay and be assaulted by the Cankers, or be unjustly punished by the kids. As predicted, the three are abused by the kids, and Jimmy reveals that it was him all along. Personally, this has been a long time least favorite for me. Don't Rain on My Ed. Thanks for picking up. Double D shows Johnny a futuristic scam that leads into Eddy learning of a free Jawbreaker sale at the candy store. Lamentably, the sale will only last for about 10 minutes, so the three have to get the lead out as quickly as possible. Numerous obstacles present themselves, with each just barely being evaded. And when they finally make it to the candy store, not only is fate against them, but they all attempt to earn the Jawbreakers together. Only one thing stands between them, a massive chicken drive. With two of the three incapable to proceed, Eddy has but two choices, and he chooses it incorrectly. And you know what? The incorrect choice backfires on him. Obviously, one of my favorites. And now the final episode, Once Bitten, Twice Ed. Eddy attempts to con money by placing walkie-talkies on objects and telling people to go to a certain location. After his first attempt fails, he insists that he's just doing it wrong and tries the same skeleton of a scam with very minor differences. It's a somewhat dull episode on the surface, but can additionally be viewed as satire for the definition of insanity and how, more often than not, numerous companies can fit that criteria. Coming soon, Season 4. Probably the most experimental season of the whole show. So,